causing people to encounter new aquatic plants. So good timing with the webinar, Kallum. If you haven't attended one of our webinars in the past, the Alberta Lake Management Society is a nonprofit based here in Edmonton, Alberta, with a vision for healthy lakes for Alberta's future. And we try and achieve that through many of our programs that you may have encountered, including our Indigenous community-based monitoring program, which runs in the oil sands region, our Lake Watch program, which collects long-term water quality data at lakes across Alberta, the Lake Keepers program, our traditional citizen science program, which runs in both the summer and winter seasons. And that enables and equips people to collect water quality data from lakes on their own. And then more recently, our algal bloom tracker project, which has developed a web application to view algal blooms in almost real time at 6 lakes across Alberta. So feel free to check that project out. And then in addition to that, we've got our environmental DNA monitoring program, which this year is collecting hundreds of eDNA samples from lakes across Alberta, looking for aquatic invasive species. And then we deliver as well about 50% of the recreational beach monitoring program that results in the potential public health advisories for cyanobacteria or fecal contamination. So lots of activities happening at ALMS. If you haven't engaged with any of these programs before, if this is your first introduction to them, I encourage you to check out our website to learn more about those. I mentioned at the get-go that we also have our Lake Stewardship Community of Practice project. Historically, this webinar and education series was funded by the Land Stewardship Centre of Canada through their Watershed Stewardship Grant program. And as many of you know, that future of the Watershed Stewardship Grant program is currently uncertain. The Land Stewardship Centre of Canada has dissolved as an organization, and that's left that important funding in limbo. So as far as we know, that funding is not available this year. However, we will still continue with our Lake Stewardship Community of Practice project. I think it's one of the more important programs that we run, and it enables lake stewardship groups to connect with each other, which is really important. And now, in contrast to last year, we've got issues with high water levels, water flowing out of weirs. Just last year, we had a webinar on drought conditions. So there's lots for us to still talk about. So we'll make sure we plow ahead with that project. Also, a shout out to our annual conference happening in Calgary this October 1st and 2nd at SAIT. Registration is open, and I hope you will take advantage of the early bird registration that's on right now. Take advantage of the reduced ticket rate, but also alleviate my anxiety because everyone waits till the last minute to register. But if you register now, I'll be less stressed. And then finally, there's a lot of resources relevant to today's discussion on our website, Aquatic Plants, our Aquatic Plant Field Guide. We've got results from BioBlitz monitoring, our milfoil monitoring project. So please check out the website following today's webinar if you want to access any of those resources. Our feature presentation, though, I'll stop talking in a second here, is Kallum McDonald. Many of you probably already know Kallum. Kallum has a diverse background with 11 years of experience in plant identification through academic work, government work, nonprofit, and industry. Kallum, as you'll see on the top of the screen here, also manages their own company, KCM Environmental. And the bio goes on, but I do want to shout out that Kallum is also a director of the Wabamun Watershed Management Council and also a member of the steering committee for the Alberta Citizen Science Project. So involved in many different aspects of aquatic ecosystems, but has a special focus in aquatic plants. You can see Kallum in the photo here presenting at our conference last fall, holding up a Phragmites. You'll have to remind us what you've named that Phragmites, Kallum, but an impressive invasive aquatic specimen there. So without further ado, I'm going to throw it over to Kallum for our webinar, Dare to Dive into the World of Aquatic Plants. Thanks, Kallum.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. And to remind folks that Phragmites is named Balthazar, the 13-foot tall invasive Phragmites, the tallest recorded for the invasive Phragmites in Alberta. Such fun. All right, I'll just get my slides up here.
Yeah, that looks good.
Looks good. Sorry, hang on. All right. Okay, well, if everyone can see and hear all right, we'll dive in. So thank you everyone for taking time out of your lunch hour to attend this. I love talking for anyone who knows me, and I'm really excited to talk to everyone today about aquatic plants, a subject near and dear to my heart. And so, yeah, there's lots of misconceptions, lots of misunderstandings, and a lot of very interesting biology going on with the plants that live in our lakes and rivers. So I'm really excited to navigate some of that with you today. So let us navigate together through the reads, and I look forward to introducing you to the plants that live in our lakes and rivers. Thank you to ALMS for hosting this. All right. We covered me already mostly. I'm a botanist by training. I have a master's degree in plant biology. I have my own company, KCM Environmental. I do a bunch of different work, and I'm pleased to also serve on the board of directors for the Wabamun Watershed Management Council. And I think we have Wabamun with us today. Ironically, I'm not joining you from Wabamun. I'm actually joining from Lake Isle today, working on a water stewardship grant project. All right, so let's set the stage for some aquatic plant discussion. So aquatic plants, I have had conversations with folks who have various opinions on aquatic plants, ranging from across the entire spectrum. And so I think it's a really interesting area of conversation where you get some very, very different feelings and different opinions, even from neighbor to neighbor living along a lake. So I just wanted to establish, so in terms of aquatic ecosystems, aquatic plants are essential. This probably doesn't come as a surprise to folks, but just as on land, so too in water do aquatic plants provide the foundation of aquatic food webs. So they're really important habitats. They are the food source, or they are the substrate on which aquatic organisms, live, mate, nest, lay their eggs. So there's a whole diversity of fish, waterfowl, amphibians, and aquatic insects that absolutely depend on a whole diversity of aquatic plants to provide their habitat needs. Aquatic plants themselves as a group are also highly diverse. In Alberta, we have, depending kind of where you draw the line, but for submerged, floating, and the deepest growing emergent plants, we have something like 90 aquatic plant species, and that's not including algae or cyanobacteria. So it's a pretty big group. There's lots to learn there. If we have plant enthusiasts who like learning different groups of plants, this is a very, very niche group, but there's a lot of species to learn. And so each of those different species, provides different habitat structure, different nutritional value to a wide variety of aquatic organisms, and that's what allows our aquatic ecosystems to be diverse and to thrive. Aquatic plants are also contentious. So they are variously loved or hated, and I do mean that. I've truly spoken with folks who have an opinion at every position on the spectrum, from loving to hating aquatic plants. And I get it. So I'm a paddler, and I don't love the resistance they pose to my kayak as I try to navigate through a so-called weed bed, or they get caught on my paddle. Of course, that for anglers and propellers, swimmers, gosh, I hate when aquatic plants touch my toes. Definitely wake up in a cold sweat in the night thinking about that sometimes. So it's not for everyone. But of course, again, for the ecosystem services, aquatic plants are what bring around our dragonflies. Aquatic plants provide the nesting habitat to so many species of waterfowl, and just like here at Lake Isle behind me, right, the western grebes are a really important topic and are a species of concern in the province and the country. So aquatic plants, it depends who you ask. Depends who you ask for sure, and maybe at what time of the year you ask, whether they are beloved or hated. But nonetheless, they are here and are present, just as the land is covered in plants. So too do our lakes and rivers provide habitat to plants that have been here for time immemorial. And then in terms of community composition, I wanted to raise this with folks. I think it's something, especially if we spend a lot of time at one lake, we don't think about all the time. But not every lake is the same by any means, and I think we all know that. That's pretty obvious. With some lakes experiencing algal blooms, some not, to varying degrees. Some lakes are colder than others. Some lakes are deeper than others, and so all of those factors play into very different plant communities. Different plants like living in different lakes. So things like pH, salinity, turbidity, the trophic state, so whether it's eutrophic or oligotrophic, all sorts of things impact the different plant species that can live and thrive in those lakes. So you can go to some lakes within an hour drive out of Edmonton, and you can have three different lakes with three completely different plant community compositions based on all of those different aspects, those different habitat characteristics of our different lakes. So there's lots to learn and lots to explore in this realm. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the ecosystem and environmental services that aquatic plants provide. And one that I love starting with, of course, is sediment stabilization. And so this is one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. And it's a nice picture, but it may not be obvious to folks why it's so amazing. And to me, this picture is just a perfect encapsulation of how emergent riparian vegetation, in this case, bulrushes, this is hard stem bulrush, growing along the shore at Beauvais Lake in southwestern Alberta. And so you can see the wall that these bulrushes have formed along the shore, and they are doing a superb job of protecting the shore from wave action. And so it's the mechanical resistance, right? It's the physical resistance of those plants reducing the kinetic energy, the wave motion that is hurtling towards the shore. And so each one of those individual stems, small though they might be, are mighty together, and they break the energy of those waves. They dissipate it, and then there's extremely little or no erosion occurring when you have healthy marsh populations like those bulrushes to protect our shorelines. So it's really impressive what plants can do. And of course, we're looking at the above the surface, but the undersurface is important as well. So they have immense root and rhizome systems, and those systems hold soil particles together. So they really bind together all that soil, and that makes it a lot harder, even if there is, say, a big storm or some really big boats ripping by, causing some big waves. Well, those soil particles are really, really strongly held together by the roots and rhizomes of those plants. Which prevents, it keeps the water from getting excessively turbid, as well as, it prevents a lot of nutrients that have otherwise settled into the sediment of the lake from being kind of reintroduced into the water column by severe wave action. So it's really, really impressive to see how aquatic plants can shield our shorelines. They really are when they're allowed to do what they do best, they're really good at protecting our shorelines from erosion. Next up for nutrients. So aquatic plants, we may not think about this because we don't tend to hear or talk to our plants and our algae. We see lots of organisms making noise and living life around the lake, and we see them interacting and competing for resources and space. But you don't necessarily think about that with plants just sitting in the water doing their thing, but they are actually actively engaged in complex relationships of facilitation and competition. And so I wanted to draw your attention to algae and cyanobacteria and their nutrient interactions and how that relates to aquatic plants. So cyanobacteria, algae, and the vascular aquatic plants that you might be familiar with in our lakes, they are competing for important chemical resources present in the water and in the sediment to an extent as well. And so, of course, I'm sure folks are familiar, especially being an ALMS associated audience. I'm sure you're familiar with phosphorus and nitrogen and the role they play in algal and cyanobacterial growth and algal blooms and things like that. And so aquatic plants, the vascular plants, are actively competing for phosphorus and nitrogen. And when they take up those nutrients are not available to cyanobacteria and algae. And so in a way, aquatic plants, not that folks maybe are super excited about extremely dense weed beds along the shore, but those weed beds may well be buffering what could otherwise be a huge amount of phosphorus and nitrogen fueling algal blooms. which of course lead to those health advisories that Brad mentioned. So I just like to think of that any aquatic plant in the water is taking up nitrogen and phosphorus that would otherwise be available to algae and cyanobacteria for a very different kind of green growth in the lake. And of course, I think it's not lost on anyone here. Harmful algal blooms can be very harmful to aquatic recreation, to wildlife, and even pets. Right? We tend to have I don't know, some small amount of dogs who are not on a leash, and they might run into the water with a harmful algal bloom occurring. Maybe drink some water, and unfortunately, some of the toxins associated with that can kill our precious pets. So. And then, of course, the algal blooms and toxins can really complicate the management and the effort required by our water treatment systems to purify that water so we can have clean running water. That said, I will caveat the studies on this are so even beyond me to understand the very complicated nutrient competition dynamics in lakes, and whether those nutrients are in the water column or whether they're in the sediment at the bottom of the lake. And different species compete differently. So it's a really complicated matrix of interactions between aquatic plants, algae, cyanobacteria, and the different nutrients that are in our lakes. Turning, of course, to insects. Boy, folks, I love this photo, but I almost should have replaced this with a photo I took 2 nights ago at Star Lake out between Edmonton and Wabamun. Star Lake has an immensity of cattails and bulrushes and such around it. And I truly cannot express to you how many thousands and thousands of damselflies were landing and mating and resting on all of the shoreline aquatic vegetation. It was unreal to see. And so I just quietly sat in my kayak while I was surrounded by these blue damselflies. And it was just a magical experience, plus some unpleasant debris left by humans in the water, but that's fine. So yeah, it was lovely to be surrounded by the damselflies. And so I think that's a great example of how important aquatic plants are to aquatic insects. So things like our damselflies, our dragonflies, stoneflies, mayflies, caddisflies, right? Loads and loads of flies, and they all require aquatic plants as habitat for mating, for resting, laying their eggs, molting, right? I encourage folks to go look out in the spring, and you can often see the molts, right? The kind of the shed skin, if you will, of the aquatic insects as they go through their transformation, and they'll leave those skins on aquatic plant stems, so bulrush stems or cattail stems. And yeah, it's just, again, aquatic plants are the foundation for so many organisms. And I love this cute little couple. I pretend they're married, sitting on this little pond lily leaf drinking water. This was in a small lake near Rocky Mountain House, and it's one of my favorite photos I've ever taken. And of course, turning to fish habitats, aquatic plants are incredibly important to fish as well. And so I like to point out, especially for juvenile fish, they are delicious snacks for things that are bigger than them. And if they want to survive, they need to get pretty good at hiding. And so aquatic plants are the hiding grounds for so many juvenile fish. If a bird or a larger fish comes by, they can retreat into the complex structure and the shadows of aquatic vegetation to wait out the danger. And so that's incredibly important for the survival of young fish to later stages. But also some fish species, for example, I've got northern pike, part of my poor photo, but it's my only photo I've taken of northern pike at the top. But yeah, northern pike and yellow perch, just as 2 examples, actually can lay their eggs on aquatic vegetation. So aquatic vegetation is directly the substrate on which these fish species might lay their eggs. And so that's a very direct and obvious relationship of why the aquatic vegetation is important to fish habitat and fish populations. Next up are grebes. So I saw some lovely western grebes this morning. I'm going to go out and see some more this afternoon. But I think grebes are a really great example of the relationship between aquatic plants and waterfowl. So I love this photo. I pulled this from a study by Hayes et al. And so this is a photo taken in California. Pardon me, this is not an Alberta photo. But it's showing western and Clark's grebes nesting in this lake in California. And so I just love this photo because, folks, you can see that immensity of birds in that population, a really big population. Every single one of those nests, where they're laying eggs, they're resting, they're raising their young, all of those nests are built directly out of submerged aquatic vegetation. So the aquatic plants are the physical structure. The aquatic plants are the building block of those nests for those species. And so I just think that's such a nice, clear, straightforward example of why aquatic vegetation is so important to waterfowl and especially to grebes who build their nests out of those plants. And unfortunately, the status of the western grebes has been an area of concern in Alberta as their populations have declined, and lakes where historically there were breeding populations no longer host those breeding populations due to a variety of factors, including loss of bulrush marshes over several decades, increased human activity on lakes, and diminished fisheries in some key lakes. So it's a bit of a tough situation for the western grebes. Oops. And then I'll just really quickly touch on aquatic plant dispersal and how that relates to waterfowl. So folks may be familiar with all of our dabbling waterfowl, so ducks, geese, swans, rails, coots, right? So they swim around in the water into the so-called weed beds, and they like to pick away at the plants. They probably snack on some insects and such as well, distributed within them. And they also will eat the seeds of aquatic plants. And so folks may be familiar, the seeds are typically nutrient dense, and which is why a lot of organisms seek out seeds to eat them because they're high in proteins and fats, which are really important to the nutritional well-being of many organisms. And so for these dabbling species, they often eat the seeds of things like pondweeds. Pondweeds produce lots of seeds kind of just around now in the season, kind of mid-July onwards. Those flowers produce seeds, and they hang around the surface of the water. And so I love this study from Van Leeuwen in 2012. They did an analysis of the survival rate of aquatic plant seeds that passed through waterfowl that were feeding on the aquatic plants, and it found that actually 6.5% of plant seeds were intact and viable, meaning that they could germinate and grow after passing through waterfowl. And I think this is just a great example of waterfowl significantly consuming aquatic plants. It's a major part of their nutrition, but also a small proportion of those seeds are actually passing through the waterfowl. So if those waterfowl, say, swim to a different part of the lake, or they fly to a different lake, they can actually act as vectors to help those aquatic plants spread to new water bodies and new habitats. Which is often how you have a new dugout or a new reservoir or something. Well, how did the aquatic plants get into there? And it may well be significantly driven by the seeds passing through waterfowl. So it's a really fascinating interaction, and I like seeing that dependency, that relationship or reciprocity between aquatic vegetation and waterfowl. And I could go on and on, folks. There's so many different organisms that are so reliant on aquatic plants for food and shelter, right? You can see a host of them here. So many of our damselflies, dragonflies, leopard frogs, etc. So many things depend on the aquatic plants, and I love the diversity of organisms in our lakes and rivers. So I'll leave it there for biodiversity of animals, etc., that rely on our plants. But there's so much more we could talk about in that front. Now, unfortunately, not everything is great for aquatic plants. There are a lot of challenges that they face. So historically, especially through colonization, there's been significant draining of wetlands, especially in the grassland and parkland regions of Alberta. So lots and lots of wetlands lost due to land conversion for agricultural use. And of course, with the draining of the water, so go the aquatic plants. Climate change driven impacts on water level, and also temperature changes as well can impact which species are able to survive in a given lake. Significant shoreline development, and often the loss of riparian vegetation associated with riparian development. Aquatic invasive species as well. Folks may be familiar with, say, Himalayan balsam, purple loosestrife, and that Phragmites stem that I had in Brad's intro slide, right? So we're seeing increased presence of several aquatic invasive plant species that are competing and pushing out native plants and taking up their habitat. Aquatic recreation as well. So some aquatic plants are very sensitive to waves, so increased waves caused by boat wakes, as well as devegetation associated with installation of docks. To be fair, that is at least partially allowed under the docks disturbance standard. But a single lake with dozens or hundreds of docks, the impact on the loss of aquatic vegetation does add up. And of course, things like pollution and eutrophication as well drive shifts and often losses in aquatic plants as conditions shift to favoring algae and cyanobacteria as you move towards hypereutrophication. So let's look a little bit at some of the plant structures. So aquatic plants are a really fascinating group within all plants because a lot of them live both under and above the water's surface. And when aquatic plants do that, they often produce different types of growth. So they kind of have one fashion outfit for underwater, and then they have a different outfit for above the water. And it's really fascinating to see the divergent growth in the plant forms. So just in brief, the kind of major categories of aquatic plant growth, we refer to them as emergent. So the upper left photo, that's mare's tail. So that refers to a plant species that rises up above the water surface. Then at the top right, you have submerged vegetation. That's one of our pondweeds, and they remain fully beneath the water's surface. Then we have two different types of floating plants. We have floating plants that are rooted into the substrate. So they stay in their spot and they might get washed around a bit by waves and such, but otherwise they are anchored into the sediment, like that pondweed, the floating leaf pondweed in the bottom right corner. And then we have freely floating plants as well. And so these plants have, they do have roots, but they might not seem like it because those roots are not anchored into the sediment. And so they're not held down, and so they can float around across the water's surface. So that's how you can have duckweeds kind of wash up in big colonies with, say, a strong wind event or what have you, that can really push all the duckweeds together. And yeah, so those are kind of the main growth forms of the aquatic plants that you'll find in the province. And then continuing with this example of below and above surface growth diverging, I just love this example of mare's tail. So this is mare's tail, Hipparus vulgaris, if you're nasty. And on the left, we have the submerged growth of this plant. So the leaves are quite a dull green, often with a bit of a reddish or magenta color. They're very flimsy. They just collapse. If you pull them out of the water, they just collapse down. They're not rigid at all. And they have a very sprawling growth habit. They can kind of grow any which direction. And then on the right, obviously a wildly different looking plant, right? Those leaves are holding themselves up. They're much more rigid. They're much shorter. They're a much more vibrant emerald green color, right? They're not nearly as kind of blah looking as the photo on the left. And they're very upright, right? They're not really sprawling around side to side. They're very upright in their growth habit. And then the photo in the middle is the proof that that is in fact the same plant on both sides. So the photo in the middle, you can see the emergent growth of the mare's tail, right? Bright green and upright, much more rigid leaves. And then the submerged growth, just a completely different world, much longer leaves, very flimsy and a different color. So it's a really fascinating set of biology for organisms that are amphibious, like these emergent aquatic plants. It's just amazing that they have developed entirely different growth structures to accommodate fluctuating water levels and waves going up and down and things like that. So just amazing biology going on in these aquatic plants. So folks, we're talking lots about aquatic plants, and if you know me, I am all about identifying plants. So I love trying to figure out what plants am I looking at and how do I know and how many are there and how are they the same or different from their relatives or invasive lookalikes. So I wanted to give us a starting point here. So this is what I'm calling my so-called top 10. One could argue if these are actually the top 10, but we'll learn the 10 more or less most common aquatic plants in Alberta, excuse me, so that you get kind of a sense of what you might be encountering the next time you go out to your lake cabin or you go launch your boat and you're wondering, what are these plants that are caught on my propeller, or what are these plants that have all the insects living on them, or what species are associated with all these grebes, for example, or what are they building their nests out of? So we're going to briefly cover kind of our top 10. And I love starting with none other than our fantastic variegated pond lily. So this pond lily, don't worry, it's our only yellow one in the province. So if you just want to call it yellow pond lily or just pond lily, I'm not going to fight you on that. But it's a fantastic species. They have these lovely yellow flowers. I can't speak personally, but beavers seem to indicate that they are delicious. I've seen lots of beavers snacking on the flowers of pond lilies. And I mean, it looks like a beautiful snack, so I can imagine it might taste pretty good as well. But I haven't asked a beaver yet to find out. So maybe I'll ask Dr. Glynis Hood, see what she has to say. But pond lilies, of course, have these fantastic floating leaves. They are kind of somewhere between a heart shape and an arrowhead shape, and they can become massive. They can become dinner plate sized, and in some cases where the sediment type and the lake chemistry is just right, their populations can absolutely explode, and they can form these massive, massive colonies. And so, folks, I'll direct us to the photo on the left. That is an underwater photo. So that photo is showing the rhizomes, the long stem structures that sprawl along the base of the lakes. And those are absolute pipes. They are so huge, they're so thick, and they're so robust that I've actually walked on them. You can kind of tiptoe along them, and they can hold up my weight. And so they're just amazing growth structures, and they sprawl to incredible distances along the bottoms of our lakes, especially in their ideal conditions. And that's how they form huge colonies, like the big photo in the middle. It's all drawing upon these huge, huge rhizomes crawling along the lake bed and putting up a huge amount of leaves. So just amazing biology, a really cool plant, and present in a lot of our lakes. I can't say every lake, but chances are if you throw a dart on the board, you'll probably throw it at a lake that has pond lily. Next up is mare's tail. So we already talked about this a bit with the divergent submerged versus emergent growth, often confused with horse tails. Unfortunately, they are very closely named in terms of their English name, but they are very, very unrelated. And so I like to tell folks that this is actually a flowering plant. And you might say, it's a flowering plant. Well, where the heck are the flowers? And so I'll direct you to look really closely and squint to the right side of your screen. And you might notice that those rings of leaves on those stems, they actually have kind of little bumps or little nubbins encircling the stem just above the leaves. And those are actually little rings of flowers that have just finished blooming. So they're incredibly small, really hard to see, but those are indeed flowers. Those are flowering structures that produce fruits and seeds, just like any other flowering plant. But they just have a very, very subtle approach to flowering because they're not too interested in attracting pollinators. They tend to rely on wind and wave action to move pollen around. So that's mare's tail. Next up is our arrowheads, our arum leaf arrowhead. Arrowhead is fine. Technically, we have two, but one is much more common than the other. And so I love this plant for a couple of reasons. One is that the leaves, it can produce so many different types of leaves. The leaves can just take completely different forms, right? If you look at these three different leaf photos here, all those leaves look completely different. So it's really diverse and really variable in what kind of leaves it can produce. And of course, those flowers are lovely and they're quite large, right? Those big spikes of three-petaled white flowers, lovely yellow center. But I'll also draw your attention to the photo in the upper right. So that is actually a flowering stalk that is underwater. And so it's one of our very few plants that can actually start blooming underwater, and that stalk will continue to elongate and come up above the water surface. But it's a really neat plant that, yeah, actually starts flowering under the surface. So I would love to get some good underwater aquatic videos and photos of that, because that's a really fun phenomenon. Next up is Richardson's pondweed. So I talked a bit about those waterfowl, right? That engage in dabbling and they like to snack on our pondweeds and eat the seeds as an important part of their nutritional intake. So Richardson's pondweed is one of our most common pondweed species. I've seen a bunch of it today already. And so this is one of the many species that provides lots of that nutrition to waterfowl, but also provides lots of habitat to aquatic insects and provides hiding spaces for juvenile fish. So Richardson's pondweed has these rather wide leaf bases that kind of hug around the stem. You can see that in the left photo. The bases of the leaves clasp around the stem a bit, which is how it gets its other name, clasping leaf pondweed. So pretty common one. Yeah, pretty much any lake or river you go to, there's a pretty good chance you're going to encounter some Richardson's pondweed. And continuing on the theme of pondweeds, here we have the floating leaf pondweed, which as a biologist, I really don't like this name because I think we have 6 or 7 pondweeds in Alberta that produce floating leaves. But so why did this one get to steal the name floating leaf pondweed? But anyways, that's my own nerdery to worry about. So floating leaf pondweed, once considered rare in Alberta, we know a lot more about it now, and it's not nearly as rare as we once thought. So one less species we need to worry about, which is good. They have these fantastic kind of egg-shaped floating leaves, and they often, just as new leaves come and old leaves die, they often have a mix of like orange and copper and red and brown mixed in as the new leaves develop or as the old leaves decompose. So it's often a lovely color mosaic with these populations. And unfortunately, I don't have great photos of it, but the submerged leaves are actually entirely different. The submerged leaves are basically spaghetti. They are long, thin strings, very long strings, and which is obviously very different from the egg-shaped leaves you see floating on the surface. So just another great example of aquatic plants doing something completely different below the surface versus on or above the surface of the water. Next up is sago pondweed or fennel-leaved pondweed. This is a very common plant. It's incredibly resilient. I've seen it growing in some lakes with very low nutrients. It's often one of the only plants growing in very low nutrient lakes. But ironically, it's also very tolerant of extremely high nutrients. So in eutrophic to hypereutrophic conditions, where there's a lot of competition with algae and cyanobacteria, the microscopic guys are having a really strong time, and the vascular aquatic plants are really being outcompeted. You typically will still have some of this sago pondweed persisting in those conditions. It's just a real tough one, and also salinity as well, and high pH, and even really warm water and really shallow wetlands, for example. Sago pondweed can just kind of handle it all. It's really impressive. One of our most durable and resilient plants. And of course, in the photos on the left and center, you can see those kind of brownish, reddish fruits. And those, of course, are delicious meals for many waterfowl. Next up, I'm kind of using this as a blanket for all of our duckweeds because we do have several things we call duckweed. But this is what probably our most common. This is Turian duckweed. If you keep just calling it duckweed, that's fine. I'm not going to fight you on it. But the duckweeds are one of those free-floating plants, right? So they do produce roots, but they don't anchor themselves into the soil. So they can just blow around with the wind and the waves, and they reproduce very, very quickly, which is kind of how you can go from 0 to 100 and think, oh no, like an algal bloom just happened. But often it's the case that if you look a bit closer, you'll see it's actually a floating layer of duckweeds on the surface. And so duckweeds are one of those things that are really good in the higher nutrient conditions. If they can form that layer on the surface, they can really block out the light that would otherwise go to fueling algae and cyanobacteria. So they're really good at kind of being the counterbalance in those conditions where you could potentially otherwise have enough nutrients for a harmful algal bloom. So those are our duckweeds. Next up, perhaps one of the most reviled plants in the province. This is our northern milfoil or northern water milfoil. So folks often misidentify this as the invasive Eurasian water milfoil. There have been many false positives, but we have not yet confirmed the invasive Eurasian water milfoil in the province of Alberta. But again, many misidentifications because of this very similar looking native relative species. This is just kind of like a sago pondweed. This one exists in such a wide variety of conditions, from very low nutrients to very high. And it can really kind of take a beating, if you will, even with a lot of algae and cyanobacterial growth, salinity, things like that. It can really handle a lot. Personally, I know this is not great, but as a biologist, I just don't love this plant. It's not my favorite. Not that it doesn't play important roles in our ecosystems, but I just find it really really underwhelming as a species. And it does definitely, it's probably one of the main things people complain about when aquatic plants, wash up on the shore and start rotting or tangle on your propellers and your paddles, things like that. It's a very good chance it's the northern water milfoil. So it definitely isn't maybe the most compatible with humans in some of our activities. But I will point out it does have some really cool flowers. So the photo on the right, those are the flowering stalks. The vegetation remains fully submerged under the water surface, but the flowers do emerge. And so we have these little rings. You'll notice the rings are two different colors. The lower rings are pink. You've got little pink flowers, and the upper rings are yellow. So the lower rings of flowers are actually the female flowers. So those are the flowers that would receive the pollen, and then the rings of yellow flowers are the stamens. So those are for the pollen-producing parts, the male flowers. And so it's kind of interesting that they've got them separated into male and female flowers, still on the same stalk, but with the males above to catch a better breeze and the female ones below to catch any pollen that might fall on them. So I do concede their flowers are quite fascinating, though they don't necessarily flower every year, so you don't always get to see that. But they should be in bloom right about now, so keep your eye out for milfoil flowers. And then next up, rigid hornwort. This is another super, super common species. Again, if your propellers or paddles have been tangled before, or aquatic plants have washed up on shore, it may well be the rigid hornwort, especially because this plant, ironically, does not actually produce roots. It is one of the few species that just kind of hangs out. It lets the water take it for a journey. It doesn't float necessarily on the water's surface. It kind of can, but it kind of just stays in tangled masses. And so this is one of the really strong competitors for nutrients against algae and cyanobacteria. This is one of your most vigorous growing aquatic plants, which again, in terms of aquatic recreation, I understand it does get in the way. It's definitely frustrated me before, but this is your, arguably your strongest competitor for those phosphorus and nitrogen nutrients in the water column to resist cyanobacteria and algal blooms. So a really important competitor in that sense. And then last but not least for our 10 plants, I wanted to introduce folks to the common bladderwort. And so folks, this is one of our about dozen or so carnivorous plant species present in the wild in Alberta. And so there might be some folks reeling from that, so I'm going to say it again. Yes, Alberta does have native in the wild carnivorous plant species, and most of them are wetland or aquatic plants. And so we actually have 3 different bladderworts. I'm just showing you the big one for now, but we have a small one, a medium one, and a big one. And this is the big one. And so it's present in a lot of our lakes, not so much in the most eutrophic lakes, but in pretty much any meso to oligotrophic lake, the kind of the middle to lower nutrient levels. That's where the bladderworts like to hang out. And so these little bumps, these bubbles, are bladder traps. And so these grow off the leaves and they have a little trapdoor mechanism on them. And so when a very, very tiny aquatic insect or animal swims past that trapdoor, they can trigger the mechanism and bam, they get sucked into the bladder, which has a negative pressure. It has an air bubble in it. And so that negative pressure sucks the insect in, and they are then trapped. It's a one-way valve and it does not open again. So the little critter gets sucked into the bladder. Eventually they die and they start to dissolve, and those nutrients are absorbed by the plant and feed the plant's growth. So incredible mechanism. Carnivory within plants is just an absolutely incredible phenomenon. And I could talk so much about these for so much longer, but I got to keep this presentation moving. So those are our top 10 that I wanted to introduce you to. There's some amazing biology happening in our lakes and rivers. And again, I mentioned at the beginning that there's something like 90 aquatic plant species, depending where you draw the line, present in Alberta. So there is so much more we could talk about with such different leaves and different flowers and different seeds, and they live in different locations, and they serve some wildlife more than others, and just an absolutely amazing array of aquatic diversity in the province that I've really enjoyed exploring over the past several years. And so this is a fun little project that I've been trying to put together, and I'd love to do this for more lakes. So I wanted to see if I can maybe inspire some folks today. So this is what I'm calling kind of a community profile or a community menagerie, a snapshot of the plant biodiversity in different lakes around the province. So I've done this for a couple lakes and a couple rivers. I'll just show one as an example. This is Wabamun Lake. I have a bunch to add to this from this year already, but these photos are all from my past 3 years of coming out to Wabamun and documenting different plant species. So I think I've got 21 on this slide, but I think we're closer to 30 or 35 with my additional visits out there. So I think it's a really cool way to kind of put together the diversity, the community that exists in different lakes. So if folks are interested in this or want some guidance, want to partner with me on this, or if you want to try it yourself, go for it, or let me know if you need some help. It's a really fun way to think about what lives in our lakes. So folks, I'm doing a bit of a 90-degree here. Sorry, I wanted to show you some fun pictures of pretty plants before I got to some not as exciting material. So I want to talk a little bit about some laws and regulations. And look, I get it's not the most exciting stuff, but laws and regulations often come with fines or jail time if you violate them. So I just do want to remind folks, whether they're exciting, laws and regulations are pretty important. So let's just do a quick overview of the laws and regulations that are relevant in Alberta to aquatic plants specifically. So first and foremost, we have the Weed Control Act. This is mostly agricultural legislation. It is designed to kind of protect crops, livestock, and good property managers from property managers that have a lot of weed issues. So with the update to the Weed Control Act earlier this year, we are up to 95 regulated plant species. Now, what on earth does this have to do with lakes? Well, there are actually 6 aquatic plants regulated, aquatic invasive plants regulated in the Weed Control Act. Should we see if I can remember them? Oh God. Okay, invasive Phragmites, flowering rush, Himalayan balsam, purple loosestrife, yellow iris, Eurasian water milfoil. That's 6. That's 6. I passed my test. Thank God. Okay, so those are the 6 aquatic plants regulated on the Weed Control Act. And so, in brief, the Act just requires property owners to manage those species if they are present on their property, so that they don't get to our lakes and rivers where they often become very hard or impossible to control. Next up is the Fisheries Alberta Act. This legislation, this is often when folks are talking about invasive mussels, and we're worried about zebra and quagga mussels coming to Alberta. It's usually the Fisheries Alberta Act's list of prohibited aquatic invasive species. There's 52 aquatic invasive species prohibited on that legislation, 16 of which are aquatic plant species. Many of those are not present yet in Alberta. It's just kind of a preemptive thing in case they were to arrive in Alberta, but some of them are present in the province. So there's a host of prohibited aquatic plants on that law. Then we have the Water Act. So this kind of applies to vegetation in a general sense. So this law protects fish habitat. It protects aquatic organisms in kind of broad terms, and it also protects the aquatic environment. Is how it's worded in the Act. And so that absolutely can mean that activities related to vegetation removal or disturbance are regulated if they can impact the aquatic environment or water flow or things like that as defined under the Act. Then under the Public Lands Act, this applies to the bed and shore of lakes and rivers, which is Crown claimed property. So the Public Lands Act could require you to pursue a temporary field authorization, so an approval, if you were, say, proposing to remove or to plant vegetation on a shoreline below that high water mark in the land that is claimed as bed and shore by the Crown. And then the 5th one here is not a law itself. It's a standard issued under the Public Lands Act's regulation. And so this is the disturbance standard that applies to docks and mooring structures. It has a very long technical name, but I just call it the docks disturbance standard. And so that standard does allow shoreline property owners to remove some amount of aquatic vegetation under some pretty strict criteria for the purposes of installing temporary seasonal docks and boat lifts and things like that. So you don't need Water or Public Lands Act approvals necessarily to install, a temporary seasonal dock, as long as you're following all of the criteria as described in the disturbance standard. And so if folks are curious about these pieces of legislation or the disturbance standard, let me know. I myself or ALMS can connect you with the text of those, and including the dock standard. If anyone has a dock or wants a dock, I would strongly encourage you to read it. It's 13 pages, so it's not the biggest, but it's not the smallest. But yeah, it's really important that these rules are complied with, because we do have lots of different rules in the province that apply to aquatic vegetation. And so I got to speed this up. I'll just briefly mention the Respect Our Lakes program. Really good set of resources. These are published by the government, and they use nice plain language, which I really like. So it's a good kind of plain language summary of various aspects of lake health and lake stewardship and management. And so kind of what are the rules? What can you do? What can't you do? What requires a permit? Things like that. So I'd strongly encourage folks to check this out. Again, myself or ALMS can direct you to these, but they're freely available PDFs on the government's open government portal. And then looking at some invasive plants real quick, I got to speed through this a little bit. Sorry, folks, but just wanted to point out shorelines with exposed soil. That exposed soil is free real estate for so many invasive species. And so I'm sure, especially with shoreline communities probably attending this webinar, you're probably familiar with things like tansy, common toadflax, and of course Canada thistle or creeping thistle, and hopefully not, but potentially Himalayan balsam as well, often called poor man's orchid. So there are lots of invasive species, and if they see some exposed soil, right, they will take that space up and establish themselves. And unfortunately, these invasive plants aren't integrated into our wildlife food webs the same way that native plants are. So they don't tend to provide nearly as many ecosystem services to our wildlife, right? Our waterfowl and our pollinators and our fish and things like that. So it's really important to maintain healthy aquatic vegetation along our shorelines, because that's the best way to keep out invasive plants, is just to leave the native plants there that already are taking up that space, taking up those resources, and providing those ecosystem services to our wildlife and our shorelines. So great encouragement to keep shorelines natural as best you can. I'm probably going to skip this one just for time. There's lots of different approaches to controlling weeds. Feel free to reach out if you want some more information on that. For plant identification resources, I won't go through these, but feel free to take a screenshot or a photo of your of the webinar screen. And I will just point out the one in pink, of course, is the ALMS aquatic plant field guide that they've developed, which I think is a really good kind of plain language, good photos guide if you want a starting point for how to learn aquatic plants. I'll also take this opportunity to highlight iNaturalist, which we're using lots these days as a citizen science platform to track species data. It's an amazing tool. And so I've been using this a lot to build the database of species biodiversity in the Wabamun Lake watershed. So if you're interested in creating a project for your own watershed, feel free to explore iNaturalist or reach out to me and I can help get you started on that, as I'm an iNaturalist ambassador through their volunteer program. Okay, we're going to plug some events in our last 3 minutes here. So I just want to let folks know August 20th at 7 p.m. I am partnering with Nature Alberta and the Alberta Native Plant Council to offer an online plant trivia night. So I'm really excited for that. Questions range from pretty darn easy to pretty darn difficult. So really excited for that. It's there's something for everyone in it, and I'm really excited for that. So that's available through Nature Alberta's website. They have the registration link there, or check out social media. They posted it there too. I'm also going to be authoring through my company an aquatic plant field school coming up in August and September. So this will be an in-person, on the ground, I was going to say boots on the ground, but it's rubber boots on the ground, a field exercise to interact with aquatic plants. It'll be a full field day, once on August 26th and once on September 10th. So feel free to reach out to me or check out my website for information there. And I'm also coming forward with an Aquatic Plants of Alberta online course that I'll be delivering through the fall and winter. It's about 20 hours of course content, and it covers essentially what we covered in this presentation, but all 90 species of aquatic plants, plus a lot more on the regulation, the invasive species, and the plant-wildlife interactions. So yeah, let me know if you're interested. And of course, thank you so much to ALMS for hosting this, and I'll plug the ALMS workshop and conference coming up on October 1st and 2nd, happening at SAIT in Calgary. So I'll be there. I'll be presenting on the grant project I'm working on this summer, which is really exciting. So thank you to ALMS for fitting that in. And yeah, I look forward to seeing folks at that annual workshop. So thank you so much for listening. I'm done babbling now, just as we're coming up on our line here. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your lunch hour for this. And I'm happy to take questions now, or feel free to email them to me. Thank you so much. Thank you, ALMS.
Great, thank you, Kallum. Yeah, we're getting lots of good reactions in the chat, and we did have a couple of questions come through. If you've thought of some questions, feel free to type them into the chat. That will be the easiest way for us to navigate through all the questions that come in. I know the first question I saw in the chat, Kallum, was whether or not we know if birds are also able to spread invasive aquatic plants. You kind of mentioned the ability to spread in seeds, native seeds that are able to still germinate. Any thoughts on invasive spread that way?
Yeah, great question. So admittedly, wildlife as vectors for invasive species is an area that needs a lot of research. We just don't have much publication or study there. Interestingly, two of the main aquatic invasive plants in Alberta, the curly leaf pondweed and the flowering rush, just for various reasons I won't go into for time, but they ironically don't produce viable seeds in Alberta. So those ones, at least in terms of seeds, pretty unlikely to be spread by waterfowl, given that their flowers just kind of wither and don't successfully produce seeds. But hypothetically, an aquatic plant producing viable seeds, if waterfowl or fish are eating those, they could hypothetically move them around. And there has been study on some waterfowl with Prussian carp, an invasive fish. How that Prussian carp eggs can, at a low rate, survive the passage through the digestive tracts of waterfowl. So it's definitely an area that needs a lot more research in terms of invasive species and the vectors that move them. But I think hypothetically that could be a concern for some species. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And then we also have a question from Blake, who is asking about whether pond lilies, yellow pond lily, variegated pond lily, would be good competitors with cyanobacteria.
Brilliant question. I love that one. Careful, I could talk about this too long. Super brief. There's lots of studies on the pond lilies, especially. They're really good with those big floating leaves at shading out the water beneath them, which really blocks out the light that would otherwise be available for algal and cyanobacterial growth. So yes, they're very good competitors in that way. Also, very briefly, many plants, including pond lilies, produce something called allelopathic chemicals. So they actually kind of put out their own algicide, if you will, into the water that can kill off algae and cyanobacteria. So they're actually directly engaging in chemical warfare. A lot of aquatic plants do that actually, that inhibit the growth of algae and cyanobacteria. So very much so, yes, they do that and they're quite good at it.
Great. And lots of good feedback still coming in. So well done, Callum. There's a question, a great question from Bruce asking if there's a standard protocol to use for doing an aquatic plant survey.
Good question. The answer is yes, there are standard survey approaches. Feel free to reach out to me if you want more details on that. But there's a lot of different ways to do it. And just with my project at Wabamun Lake, we're actually using 3 different surveying approaches. So yes, there are some kind of standard approaches. Feel free to reach out if you'd like more details on them.
Perfect. And I think those are all the questions. There was one question in the chat asking whether this was recorded and if that will be made available afterwards. And yes, absolutely. Kallum is happy to share this recording afterward with everyone. And I know not everyone who registered was actually able to attend today, so we'll make sure that everyone who registered gets a copy of this recording. And someone is asking, is that mare's tail you're holding in the picture?
Great question. That is a handful of our longbeak buttercup, our Canada waterweed, and there was some curly leaf pondweed mixed in there, which is why I was visiting that location. So it's a whole mix, but primarily our Canada waterweed. That is Rattlesnake Lake, which is a reservoir west of Medicine Hat.
And if you missed it in all of the chat, then take a look back. We've added a link to the aquatic plant field guide. We've added a link to Kallum's website, to the Respect Our Lakes website, and then also
Awesome.
to the conference registration if you're interested in that.
Great.
Okay, let's see. Just scrolling through. I think we've caught everyone's questions in the chat. So, and we are also just over our hour here. So thanks, Kallum, for sharing your knowledge with us and for all the effort you put into pulling together such a nice looking presentation. And thanks everyone for being such great attendees and sharing your lunch hour with us. As I said, we will make sure to circulate this recording. And then because you've attended today's webinar, we'll make sure you're added to a list to receive notification about future webinars that we'll be hosting as well. And thank you to Kirsten, hiding in the background, helping us navigate the participants and the chat. Really appreciate that. With that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.